being able to draw, well, let's say relatively straight lines freehand is a great skill to develop when we draw, particularly if we enjoy drawing architectural scenes such as this. Lots of straight lines of all sorts of lengths. Here are 6 tips and techniques that I've used to help me train myself to draw straighter lines more easily than I could do when I first started drawing. And this first one is possibly the most important, and that's to work really hard at drawing with our whole arm. It's very easy when we start to learn to draw to continue the habit of holding the pen we have from learning to write, which is down near the end, and very much using our fingers for all of the fine control that we need to create relatively small shapes for the letters. But when we draw, this is not so helpful. When we write, we also tend to rest on our hand or our wrist because that helps us get control in our fingers. But when we draw, doing this makes it harder for us to get nice straight lines, because when we rest on our wrist or our hand, we tend to pivot. We tend to not be able to get a nice smooth line, and we tend to get some sort of an arc. Instead, we want to try and lock our forearm into place and draw from our elbow or from our shoulder, as much as possible from our whole arm. Will we give it the straight line test? Well, that's not too bad, I don't think, for a long freehand line. And you can see how it would just have been impossible if I was resting on my wrist. Not so helpful. My second tip concerns the start. What we want to do when we're drawing a straight line is to avoid resting our pen on the paper before we start to draw. We get this blob, and while it may not look a great deal just here, with a lot of straight lines, with a lot of blobs at one end, it can start to become quite distracting. It can start to detract from the overall effect we're trying to build up in our scene. Better is to come down with a slight bit of movement before we let the pen hit the paper at the point that we want. That way, we avoid the blob at the start. Another thing I find quite helpful, this third point, is it's quite natural when we draw to be looking at the nib and to be guiding it with our hand to where we want it to go. But far more helpful is to have an indication of where we want the line to finish, and I usually put a dot where I want my straight line to finish, and to focus on that point and to intuitively bring the pen to that point. Now you can see I slowed down a little here and finished just shy of the point, but I find this a very helpful way to get accuracy. And when I'm trying to get a particular angle, I find it tremendously helps with that, to focus on where I want that line to finish. And very helpful is actually to do a dress rehearsal movement, a dry run, before we attempt to do the line. And we can make an adjustment. So mark where we want the line to finish up, and then focus our eyes on that point and bring our arm intuitively up to that point. Now, my fourth point is sometimes we have a very long line to do, and we may feel that it's actually longer than we can draw relatively smoothly and straight. So in that case, there's nothing wrong with breaking it up into smaller segments. And that may give us a far more satisfactory line than drawing or trying to draw one long continuous one. Now, particularly when we do this, let me give you a little bonus tip. When we're joining lines, don't do this. Because we get a blob. Instead, touch the paper as close to our previous line ending as we can without touching it, and there is a very slight gap there. That is usually far less distracting than an ink blob. My fifth point, though, is simply speed. When we're feeling nervous, it's quite natural that we tend to go slowly, which can bring all sorts of little irregularities into our line. Very slight variations that happen really because of the slow speed. When we do a nice, fairly fast line, we get a far more even line, and if we're drawing from our arm, it's far more likely to be straight. Now, in this case, my arm was getting too close to my body because we're moving down the page. And so the sixth point when we're drawing straight lines is always to position our paper so that our arm has plenty of free movement in relation to our body, the table, anything that might be around us on our drawing surface or furniture or the wall or something. Always position our paper before we start to do a long straight line, or any mark really, so that we have a nice clear movement. And for most of us, we will have an angle where it's easiest for us to draw a straight line. It quite probably won't be this. It may be more this. And it will probably vary for each of us. So the thing is to get an understanding of what I call our sweet spot for drawing straight lines, straight, smoothly, with a nice, even, free-moving movement. And so if I need to draw a horizontal line, I turn my paper so that my horizontal line is in my sweet spot angle. Long horizontal lines or shorter ones, but still significant ones, turn up all over the place. It's certainly worth a little effort developing this skill and also mastering the technique which lets us draw straight lines as straight as we're able to draw them for whatever particular stage in our drawing development and learning we're at. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope this has been helpful. These are the little parts that go together to create the big part. So I hope you have fun exploring some of these thoughts I've given if you haven't had them already. But in the end, whatever you draw and however straight your lines are or aren't, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.